embarking on any kind of spiritual, expansive quest, there's going to be a period of grief or mourning for the past version of you and some of the past activities and friendships that you enjoyed. At least this was the case for me.
Alex Hardy is an entrepreneur and coach who helps men discover purpose and fulfillment in their lives. After selling his last business to Docusign, he spent the next few years deepening his search for truth and authenticity. In this conversation, we discuss how to navigate the many facets of spiritual transformation. Topics covered include recognizing your conditioning, moving through shifts in preferences and friendships, and leaving behind people-pleasing tendencies to step into your authenticity.
I think that first hit me when I first pushed pause on the achievement treadmill at some point in my 20s and was kind of like, wait, why do I want the things that I want? It had been just the water that I was swimming in of get the best grades, go to the best school, optimize the amount of money I'm making, and all of these accumulations, like you said, that it was not even a conscious quest that I was on.
Alex shares how he was able to shift from being the consummate nice guy to an integrated, authentic one.
This nice guy behavior is what he calls toxic shame, which is a lack of belief in your own inherent worth. As a man, I don't believe I am inherently worthy. I have to appease everyone else in my environment and make sure, try and be likable to them and not cause conflict to them so that not so that they'll like me for me, but so that they won't be annoyed enough at me to cut me off.
Alex shares how in order to move beyond old patterns, we first need to meet and accept what's there.
The only way I know of to overcome it is to get familiar and comfortable with it and to sit in it, to sit with it, really investigate what's so bad about it. Is it even possible for you, whatever I am, is it even possible for me to truly be alone? And I think that's where being open to some of the mystery of consciousness and existence is really beautiful, because when I ask that question, I'm often surprised by the answer.
Before we get into this conversation, I want to ask you to join this amazing community of consciousness explorers. This whole idea of pursuing expanded consciousness and the boundaries of human potential while living a modern life is relatively new, which is why we interview revered masters, teachers, experts, and practitioners to help you on your own journey. To stay up to date on the latest conversations, simply click subscribe below and you'll be notified each time a new episode comes out. I am so grateful for all of your support and comments. I love reading them. Now let's dive into this conversation. Alex, it's great to see you, my man.
Scott, it is an honor to be here to share this space with you.
Yeah, well, this has been a long time coming because we've had so many deep conversations and explorations, and I figured it was time we made one public. So here we go.
Beautiful.
I think where I want to start this off is, I know a big part of your journey over the past couple of years has been men's work. Mm-hmm. It's actually not something that I have spent as much time with. And I'd be curious from your perspective, why is this important and why is it more challenging to be a man today?
Yeah, this has been a big part of my practice and my worldview for the past, call it, year or so. And the term men's work for me for a long time, I think, felt kind of cringe or something that was a little bit alienating towards me. It felt, I don't know, I had certain notions about it. And I first got into it when I was living in Bali last year, and I went to a men's group, and it really kind of blew my expectations and surprised me in a very pleasant way. There was the group that I went to took a lot of cues from 12-step recovery programs, so it was kind of modeled in that vein where confidentiality was very important, no advice giving was very important. Just kind of creating a space where people could just share their experiences and witness each other was really the simple practice. And I was blown away by how much I was moved by what the other men in the group were sharing. Even though I wasn't necessarily even saying anything or reacting, it had such a strong pull internally to me. Like I really resonated with these other people. And then when I went and shared all of my stuff that I had kind of been carrying, it felt very similar. There was something very, very powerful about being witnessed in a space where I didn't have to perform and where I felt there was no other agenda other than just being seen and connection. And I hadn't been in that kind of space in a very long time. I realized that there were very few, if any, male only spaces in my world. When I was a kid, I went to an all boys overnight camp, but once that ended, there had never been like a man only experience that I had really had. And so this diving into this last year and over the past year has just been pretty it's been pretty eye-opening and powerful.
And what about like the man only aspect to you is nourishing?
I think that in a lot of co-ed contexts, there can be a desire to perform, and it might even be subconsciously. But if that when in certain mixed contexts, people, men, me specifically, care about how I'm coming off, how I'm being portrayed, wanting to get certain people to feel a certain way or like me. There could just be certain complicating dynamics in mixed spaces. And there's just something really powerful and safe, I would say, about a space that is just men with, with kind of the, I guess, bro code, if you will, being respected.
Yeah, I would also say too. I mean, even just the container of having a group of men who are willing to go there is so rare. When you were talking and describing your experience of like not having a really opportunity to be in an environment where you didn't have to perform, I mean, I felt like I've rarely had that even just amongst guy friends.
Yeah.
Because so much of our backgrounds being entrepreneurship in New York City and blah, blah, blah. And that whole thing was just like all performative. Like, how much were you killing it? Who are you dating? What cool things are you doing on the weekend? How's your company doing? It just is so performative.
Yeah, there's definitely in some of those, even with other men, as you said, certain friend situations, it's not okay to be struggling in some way. Struggles, complaints, whatever you want to call it, are not always welcome. And I think it dovetails into men's work more broadly because in a lot of popular culture, people don't want to hear about complaints that men have. We're burning down the patriarchy these days. So, men who have 10x the rate of suicide, or are much more incarcerated, or much more likely to have one of these deaths of despair, become addicted to opiates. All of these things, in the meta, society seemingly is kind of turning a blind eye towards a lot of the struggles of men. And I think that plays out in some of the situations that you were talking about with friends, that there's this air to keep up that I'm crushing it. I'm doing great. My company's going well, etc. And so performance and performative, that word really feels like it describes how I had lived a lot of my life, even in male-only spaces.
I wasn't aware of those statistics.
Yeah.
And so did you just like highlight those again?
Yeah. I mean, and I don't know the exact numbers, but it's something like suicide rate is, men are like an order of magnitude more likely to commit suicide than women. I don't know the exact number, something like 4 times or 5 times maybe. The opioid addiction rate, much higher. Many more men are incarcerated than women, and there's a whole host of other, I guess, maladies. Obviously, men are more likely to like die in war, die in the workplace. There's kinds of these. There's a certain disposability of men, I would say, that popular culture seemingly ignores.
Yeah, that's a strong word. Yeah, it's been really interesting, right? Because like I've experienced the backlash of that a little bit in my own life, and where like I always would have really good intentions for things, and like certain words that I used that I was ignorant that it was even offensive, like just like set someone off to like go nuclear on me. Like I remember this example where I was asking a group of coworkers like, hey, what are you guys up to after work? And like the fact that I used the word guys resulted in an explosion. And I was just trying to like learn about your life. And so there's this culture that we're in for a lot of men, myself included. There's a sense of needing to walk on eggshells. And it really sucks, actually.
Yeah. It's tough. It's tough to be a man. In many ways, it's tough when there aren't outlets or places to express certain emotions, anger. It's not cool to show anger, and that's a story that I have carried for a very long time until very recently. But I think that in the corporate world is a perfect example of this walking on eggshells concept, of this this idea that of appeasing and regardless of intention of one's intention, that you have to always say the right thing or else. And yeah, that's definitely a challenge that I had during my stint in corporate America as well, that really kind of triggered me.
So now that you have access to these menswear containers, like how has that shifted your experience?
A few things come to mind. The first one is that I've noticed what changes when I don't attend a men's group or have like a men only gathering. Like when I got back to Austin, I was kind of settling in and hadn't really, just was busy, and so I hadn't attended a men's group in about a month, and I realized that I just felt like I had a lot of stuff kind of pent up, and a lot of like this stuff kind of almost bubbling over, and I was also feeling kind of sad and just drained and just energetically depleted. And I attended a men's group a couple weeks ago, and it was crazy. Overnight, my just energy shifted from being in that nourishing space. I think the word for it is nourishing, and it's helped me also prioritize my friendship with men in my life, you being one of them, like the importance of that and wanting to really invest in that. It's helped me, I think it's made it clear to me that in seeking out some of these transformational experiences that a lot of us spiritual folk desire, that there can be really powerful ones in rites of passage, like male specific rites of passage. So it's I would say that's how it's shifted my outlook and my experience.
I think it can be immensely nourishing too, to just be around other guys who are talking about things not going perfectly.
Yeah.
Because it's like, for me, I'm in a relationship with Sahara where I can tell her about, hey, this went well, that went well, and this went well. And it just kind of hits a little bit differently with your partner versus like who you're so in it with, versus like being around other people like you who have some similar context, inherently talk about the fact that, yeah, they're going through it too.
Yeah, that's a huge piece. And two things come up for me when you said that. One, in those circles, I feel sometimes when people are sharing, I'm like, wow, I see the world completely differently from you. I have no idea how this is even a struggle for you. It's like stuff that I can do so easily, blah, blah, blah. So there's some kind of like, I don't know, pride and judgment, but also just awareness of the differences that I have with certain people. But on the other hand, there are so many common shared experiences that hearing other people go through them, other people struggle with some of these foundational things like relationship with family, with romance, with work, that just makes me feel less alone, to hear other people do it, because it can be being the experience of being a man can be very lonely. The experience of the entrepreneurial journey can be extremely lonely. And so finding that brotherhood and that connection is nourishment that I didn't know that I needed.
That's beautiful. I'd also add the experience of being a new parent can be lonely, because you're a lot of times just having to stay at home, and do that, and you can't just have that freedom to just go and do things and be with friends and all of that kind of stuff, as you previously were able to. One of the words that you said that I know you've spent some time studying is rites of passage.
Yeah.
And the role that has traditionally played in societies and cultures and manhood that has largely been stripped down from Western culture. I'd be curious to know kind of what you've learned and what role you think that maybe these should play in our societies more prominently than they do currently.
Yeah, this has been kind of a rabbit hole that I've dove down pretty deeply in the past year or so. There's an amazing book called Iron John, which people can check out, that is really talking about the human experience of being a man. And it talks a lot about rites of passage and analyzes them through different cultures. And the long and short of it is that that for basically the entirety of human existence, going from boyhood to manhood was not a given. It was not guaranteed, and it was not. It was something that had to be earned. And there are many different cultures that have had many different concepts of what a true rite of passage to go from boyhood to manhood was, but symbolically it represented the separation of the boy from the feminine and from being kind of attached to his mother to becoming a man of the tribe and being able to protect, provide, and fulfill his duties and obligations. And so some of those rites of passage look like vision quests of going out into the woods for a certain number of days without food or water, or to have to hunt and kill a certain animal, perform these tasks where safety was not guaranteed. It was going to be emotionally challenging and an emotionally rigorous experience, and it was going to connect you with a higher power. So those are kind of the two, I would say, the two key aspects of a valuable rite of passage. It is challenging, like real, maybe there is real physical or emotional danger, and it connects you to the broader tribe or the broader humanity or God or something of that vein. And
I didn't know that about the second part.
Yeah.
I didn't know that was part of this body of practice.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think in modern times there have been rites of passage. Like, I think of the two rites of passage for me, and each of them was missing one of those two factors. So when I think back to my rites of passage, one, I was raised Jewish. I had a bar mitzvah. And so that is when a Jewish boy becomes a man, and you get called up and you read from the sacred text of the Torah. And that was connecting me with something greater, but there was no challenge to it. It was given, it was like a big party. I got a bunch of gifts. I didn't have to earn it.
Your challenge was finding the cute girl on the dance floor.
Exactly. Challenge was drinking 10 Shirley Temples. And then on the other hand, another rite of passage I had was fraternity pledging, which was extremely challenging. And, it was physically and emotionally grueling and had some, crazy stuff that I had to endure and go through physically and mentally. But it didn't connect me to anything greater outside myself. It was basically a very tough admission to a drinking club. And so and that, when I think back to my rites of passage and what's missing, like something that would fuse the two of them together is what I think we're missing in today's society. And it shows. I think it shows with a lot of the meaning crisis that many men are feeling, and also, this kind of perpetual adolescence that a lot of people are in, Peter Pan syndrome, of people not getting married late, people not dating anymore, people living with their parents, playing video games. Like, all of these to me are related and are a symptom of a lack of initiation into manhood.
I think a lot about soulcraft. I don't know if you've explored that work at all. I actually forget who I honestly forget who the author is, but he has this model of development, and basically in that model of development, it's very similar to a lot of these unified models of consciousness. It talks about how most adults are actually like in an adolescent level of maturity in the West, and they haven't yet truly crossed that threshold of how he defines like a more evolved adult who takes complete responsibility for their life and responsibility for their emotions and all of the responsibility for their inner experience. And it's kind of interesting that is, something that has been documented in certain types of developmental models and compared against the current population, and the fact that we don't have an initiation. We don't have a clear demarcation in our culture that supports kind of like, hey, you're an adult now.
Yeah.
You need to get off mom and dad's cell phone and bank account and all these things and start to take responsibility for your life.
Yeah, and the big piece that I think is missing from the initiation is the role of older men that older men play in that kind of development. So in some of these older societies, there was like a tribe of elders, or it was kind of the shared responsibility of the men of the group to initiate the boys. And for a lot of different reasons, men, at least what I found, like boys, the worthy, admirable role models and wise kind of caretakers have just, the amount of those has gone down dramatically in the West. I mean, we see the number of like single mother households where men are, not involved. A lot of, as I think back to my own like schooling experience, even, almost all my teachers were women. All of my, we're looking at like therapy also as a way that people sometimes are shaped, the vast majority of therapists are women, and on. There are like the amount of positive male role models, I think, in a lot of boys' lives is just vastly diminished from where it was even a couple generations ago.
Wow. I also think it brings up the question of like, what is a wise man? What is an elder? What is wisdom? And something that I've been thinking a lot about is how, for me, wisdom is essentially aligned to your ability to see true reality. It's your ability to actually have the awareness to understand the natural order of things. And this is a concept that's very popular in Taoism and a lot of the things that I study, where it's like, we have, like, the earth has always been round. There's always been a billion planets. There's always been all these things, but our level of awareness is what actually has empowered us to see reality as it is. Like, that awareness is what creates the wisdom and the knowledge of what already is. And in our society, I think the way that we we think about wisdom is the accumulation of information that's going to make us money, or have us essentially like play a game that isn't the wisdom game. That's not the game. The game we're playing is like the accumulation game. Accumulate more status, accumulate more money, accumulate more friends, accumulate more trips. So like we have most of the men that I was surrounded by, all my coaches and sports and all these things, they were all in service of that game.
Yeah.
And that game was propped up by a certain depth of awareness. And so, and by the way, that game certainly wasn't like, part of wisdom is when you have that understanding, you align to the natural order of things. You align to the natural way and of the unfolding of the universe and all of these kind of guiding principles that are in operation in nature, but you really don't see them until you look for them. And so it's kind of like you learn a rule set, at least in the US, that actually feels very misaligned to the natural order. And many of us, myself included, have gradually had to face that and look at those things in the eye and kind of untangle them.
Yeah. Very relatable for me. I think that first hit me when I first kind of push pause on the achievement treadmill at some point in my 20s and was kind of like, wait, why do I want the things that I want?
It's a powerful moment.
Yeah. And it had been just the water that I was swimming in of get the best grades, go to the best school, try and optimize the amount of money I'm making, and all of these accumulations, like you said, that it was not even a conscious quest that I was on. It was really just, it was so obvious that I didn't even question it until I did. And yeah, I think that's a powerful statement of the programming that gets pushed on people.
Yeah, you just become indoctrinated into this whole way of being that you didn't even know was happening.
Yeah.
It's wild. One of the other indoctrinations that I know a lot of men have dealt with, myself included, is this Mr. Nice Guy whole thing. And I know you've spent some time with that, and I'd love to hear you talk about it.
Yeah. This book called No More Mr. Nice Guy by Dr. Robert Glover, it just changed my life. I have no other way to describe it. It's one of the most important books I've ever read. It describes this concept of a nice guy, which is basically a person who wants to get the approval of others, who will push down and suppress their own genuine wants and needs in order to go along and get along, and basically try and not ruffle too many feathers or be too confrontational as a survival strategy. And I read this book. It was written probably 20-something years ago, maybe more. I think it was written in the 90s. I read this book, and I thought I had just read my autobiography. It was that. Wow. It hit that deep. I was like, oh, wow. And the core of what causes certain men to behave like this nice guy behavior, is what he calls toxic shame, which is a lack of belief in your own inherent worth. As a man, I don't believe I am inherently worthy, and so I have to basically appease everyone else in my environment and make sure, try and be likable to them and try and not be, not cause conflict to them, etc., so that they'll not so that they'll like me for me, but so that they won't be annoyed enough at me to cut me off in some way. And this has incredibly wide-ranging applications, whether it's to dating, to workplace, to friendships. All of these behaviors kind of, can leach out into all of those areas, and I'll say cause problems for men, or at least cause them to not have the life that they want.
It makes me think of this major distinction that I've realized in my experience, which is there's a difference between nice and loving.
Yeah.
You know, because I too had parents and conditioning that was like, do the right thing, be nice, be nice, be nice. And I was nice to everybody but myself, you know, and I thought that being a good person was being nice.
Yeah.
And, you know, the context of that niceness, where it was emanating from, as you described, was ultimately a desire to get approval, a desire to deal with the unconscious low self-esteem and not loving myself and all of these things to kind of appear a certain way. And so, you know, that was just a very different, the actions were emanating from a very different context than just genuine love and care for others.
Yeah.
Because I just think it's such an important point, because so many people, they get on this consciousness journey and they conflate it with like being soft or being passive or being nice.
Yeah.
And it's true that as the heart opens, like, you are just more naturally a lot of those things, but like the place that it comes from, which is the most important thing, is different.
Yeah.
And I also do think that as you do step into more self-love, you can hold that balance of standing up for yourself, freely expressing yourself, and also doing so in a loving way.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, I love that. And in this book and in a lot of the men's work stuff that I've dabbled in, there is the rhetorical question is like, okay, well, if you're not going to be a nice guy, then what are you? Are you an a-hole? Like, that's kind of the common retort.
Polarized thinking.
Right. And it's not. That's actually not the opposite of a nice guy. The opposite of a nice guy, or how to shift out of nice guyism, is to become integrated. An integrated man is what Dr. Glover calls it, and, you know, what I've kind of adopted, which is like honoring, seeing all parts of yourself, accepting them all, not needing to change them, and coming from a place really of truth, like being true to yourself and speaking truth. Because fundamentally, the problem with a nice guy is that they're dishonest, really. They are not honest to other people about how they're feeling, what their boundaries are, what their wants and needs are. And people can pick up on that. They're kind of not trustworthy because of that. They become passive aggressive because of that. And so tuning into and speaking from your own truth in a place of integration is absolutely a great antidote for it.
So if someone senses that they're maybe living the life of a nice guy, the quiet life of desperation of a nice guy, what are the things that you found most supportive for moving into that more integrated state that you talk about?
Yeah. I've got a few things come to mind. I think first off would be joining a men's group. That was really a huge first step for me to kind of find these spaces where I could talk about this stuff and maybe get reflections from others. Another piece was around learning how to set boundaries. That was a really big one, of being able to say no when I needed to say no, and kind of build that muscle. I liken setting boundaries as kind of like going to the gym in a certain way. And the more it's going to be uncomfortable, and you're going to be terrible at it at first, or at least I was. And then as you do it more and more, it becomes more natural. I read this really good book about boundaries and assertiveness called When I Say No, I Feel Guilty, which was like it's an incredible title.
Wow, that's like, I mean, how on the money is that?
So good. It's really old too. It was written in like the 80s, I think, or 70s. But it's about assertiveness and boundary setting. And yeah, that really opened my mind to what it could mean to set boundaries. So I think men's group, learning how to set boundaries was big. And then for me, it was connecting with the parts that I had been suppressing, specifically around anger. That was really a big one that I I kind of, because I've been doing a lot of this spiritual work, love and light, I was feeling very zened out, and I thought I just didn't get angry. Like that was my story that I told the world. And it was actually my spiritual teacher who pointed it out that if you're a human being, you're probably getting angry. You're probably just suppressing it. So that's something to tune into. And reconnecting with the parts and the situations where anger was triggered and welcoming it and not identifying with it. Welcoming it, finding a healthier, safe way to express it, but not totally becoming it. I think that was really another big unlock for me that helped me kind of help me overcome some of the nice guy stuff.
Yeah, it's like a unconscious bypass. And it's such a fascinating part of spirituality because it's not your intention to bypass. I had a very similar relationship with anger. It wasn't never my intention not to feel it. I just didn't feel it. And my ego had devised a way to obscure it without my awareness of it. And I just continue to notice its ability to do that. Like I'll give you a crazy thing a big unlock for me recently. Sure. So my teacher, I have a very, I don't actually have a ton of content in my mind. Like it's actually pretty just no thought most times.
Wow.
And, but a lot of sensations physically, a lot of physical sensations. And my teacher was like, I think you might have a no thought. And I'm like, well, what's that? And she's like, well, a no thought is a way that the ego basically prevents information from coming in. Wow. It's like a blind wall. It's like a wall that's created. Whoa. That the content is there, but it's intentionally obscured, and you think that you're just in stillness. And I was like, okay, well, let's try this. And holy shit, there is like raging waters behind these no thoughts. Wow. And it was completely unconscious.
Wow.
That whole dynamic was going on. And it's just remarkable.
Wow.
How even when we have the right intent, even when we're like, I want to feel all the freaking things, I want to, face what I got to face so that I can, be in my authenticity in a deeper way. Like there's still these constructions that occur unbeknownst to us.
Yeah. Wow.
To protect us.
Wow. I kind of just got goosebumps with that. That's really cool. Is actually that thinking alone and like meditation alone sometimes can't get me all the way there. And I think certain embodiment practices and movement practices, especially with energy, can be really, really powerful for that. And I think I shared with you before, but something I did this past weekend was a workshop in something called core energetics, which is basically a way to move energy in a physical, like using your body. And it starts in more of this was with all men. We were kind of in a circle, and it started with one man just talking about something that kind of was coming up for him, a block, an issue in a relationship of some kind, and the facilitator then like kept kind of prodding him and prompting him to get to the feeling. And once the feeling was there, the man got called up into the middle of the circle. And in the middle of the circle, there's this massive pillow, like 4 feet tall, 4 feet wide, 2 feet deep, huge foam pillow. And the man gets handed a tennis racket. And the invitation is to just lift the tennis racket up over your head, slam it down as hard as you can over and over and over again, and let any words, thoughts, profanity, etc. come out. And it was like one of the most liberating experiences I've had in my life, of just taking the tennis racket and saying, F you, whoever I was targeting. I won't put them on blast on here. But there was just something really profound about getting using the body to access those states that just with thinking or talking alone certainly wouldn't have been able to get me there.
Wow, that's awesome. That's really cool. And yeah, I agree with you that there does seem to be, I know a lot of people will refute this, but there does seem to be limitations to like just meditating. And another thing that I've recently found out about that you might find interesting is that I had unconsciously created a habit of dissociating while meditating. And so I would be feeling something somatically, and then I would just at some point just kind of like forget like where I was or what I was doing or like what was coming up. And I was like, wow, I'm just like really good at, I guess I'm just good at feeling things and it was again an unconscious protection mechanism for fully being with something. And I think a lot of meditation practices unfortunately kind of train us to do this, where we're watching the thoughts and we're letting it go. We're watching thoughts, letting it go. Well, what that actually can do in certain instances is it can train you to actually not just fully be with whatever is emerging.
Yeah. And
it just creates this dissociation, and you kind of have to unlearn it.
Yeah.
There's a distinct difference between being in a calm, alert state and being the watcher of that and just being with it, versus being in a calm, alert state, watching it, and then just like floating into this, where am I again?
Yeah.
Like, what am I?
Yeah.
Very fascinating stuff. One of the things you said was being the watcher of anger, not getting entangled in it, but then I think you might have said integrating it. What does that look like for you?
For me, so previous to kind of tuning into some of this stuff, I just thought that it didn't exist, and I think there can sometimes be a trap, or at least a temptation to like, oh, okay, now that I've accessed anger, it's like cool to just go around and kind of like be angry everywhere and kind of let it rip in front of anyone. And that's not what I would recommend, and not kind of how to skillfully, I would say, use it. So I think the way that I integrate it is like feeling it, kind of figuring out how to put a pause between the stimulus and the response, like find the space in between, something emerging and my reaction to it. And I would say the best way that I integrate it is I will go on, like if I've had something intense emotionally come up, like this past weekend of all of that anger workshop, great example. Like what I did to integrate that was I would just walked around, there's like a 4-mile loop around downtown Austin, the lake, and I just turned on my voice note recorder and just started talking into it and just really speaking kind of reflecting on that whole experience, what came up, what it meant to me, and like verbally processing it. To me, that was a really good way to integrate the experience and that emotion, and it kind of like closes the loop on something coming up. It was okay. I was fine with it. I was able to feel it and not associate it with it. And I think that can help kind of repattern, how I am and how those reactions and those cycles are. It's not that, it's kind of like towing the middle line between total suppression and totally getting wrapped up in it. And yeah, just figuring out and kind of normalizing that as a behavior.
That's cool. I've never done that before. I like that idea. Yeah, I've heard certain people, like for example, Daniel Thorson, talk about the intelligence of anger, and so how, actually integrating it and not like kind of just trying to dispel it is quite important, and it's something I'd like to learn more about.
Yeah.
What to do with it after you just kind of observe and allow it to be there. If there's more there, that can be productive use of the energy.
Yeah. I mean, the other way that I have integrated it has been in martial arts, actually. Like that to me has felt like an incredibly helpful and nourishing outlet for, like righteous anger, or like, an appropriate place to dispel it, like being in that kind of, you want to talk about an initiation or rite of passage, being in like a combat setting, which I've only recently gotten into in the last, few months. That has been like an incredible outlet for that. It's been really eye-opening, and like a safe or appropriate place, one of the few in society where you can be angry and show it.
Yeah, it's another interesting thing to think about, right? That how historically we have had, being hunter-gatherers, most of us have just had a natural way to kind of dispel and to use and to develop a healthy relationship with this thing, because we had such a physical existence.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have that anymore.
Right.
Even I would say it's quite different going to Equinox and doing some curls as it relates to anger than going and finding your dinner.
Well, yeah, totally. And it's like, there are, I forget which gym it is. Maybe it's like LA Fitness or one of those, where there's actually a rule that it's Planet Fitness. There's a rule that you're not allowed to like grunt when you're lifting weights. They have like a whole system of shaming people for doing that. And I found that so fascinating, because to me, the gym that I go to here, it's very much like a weightlifter, bodybuilder vibe. People can yell and grunt and be barefoot and shirtless, and it's awesome. And it feels like a much more primal connection. But it's even in the few places where it's safe, it's like this gym, Planet Fitness, is like trying to squeeze that anger out of it. It's really interesting how it's like there are very few places in society where it's acceptable.
I agree. So I feel like we've been talking a lot about, just your various like evolutions, right? Mm-hmm. Things that as you've changed, you've had to shift your way of being. And I know one thing that we have talked about in the past is, what that can mean for friendships. And I know I have and continue to be on that journey. And I think it's one of the hardest things for people going through a spiritual transformation.
Yeah.
Because often they're changing and nothing around them is changing. Everything else is staying the same. So I'd love to hear from you what that experience has been like.
Wow. Yeah. A lot comes up for me for that. I think first off, embarking on any kind of spiritual, expansive quest, there's going to be a period of grief or mourning for the past version of you and some of the past activities and friendships that you enjoyed. At least this was the case for me. And, a big one, I stopped drinking a few years ago, and that made me really aware of how many people were only my friends because we would get drunk together. Like it became very obvious that that those were people that were kind of solely in my life for that reason. And to some extent it's sad, but also to some extent it's so liberating and freeing that, that we don't have to do this performative thing of like pretending to like each other or pretending to be super resonant with each other, when it was just kind of alcohol that was our only binding thing keeping us together. And I think with other friends, it's been a mixed bag. With certain people from my, like New York finance bro, tech bro, hustler days, a lot of people have fallen away, and that's been kind of sad, but also just a part of life. But there have actually been a lot of people that have stuck around and have been genuinely curious about me and this growth, and have said that seeing me do whatever things I've done, whether it's stop drinking or explore this, take a sabbatical, any of these things, they've said they've been inspired by it. And so I do find some solace and comfort in that maybe something that I'm, picking up or giving off in this journey can actually help someone else on their path to, seeking something more and seeking a connection with something greater.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. And I think, you've talked about like the word friendship and like the definite, like how you define it. Like, share more.
Oh yeah. This was a conversation I had in Bali, with a good friend of mine over there. And this guy I met at a men's group, and we were talking about, I was talking to him, we were at lunch, and I was complaining about someone in my life. And I was like, yeah, my friend told me he was going to do this, and then he did that. And it was, I was kind of going on and complaining about something about how I got taken advantage of. And he just, I'll never forget this. He stopped me dead in my tracks. He was like, Alex, before you say another word, you need to re-examine your use of the word friendship. You're throwing this word friendship around like it's like everyone's your friend. Everyone is on that level. Friendship is something sacred. This person that you're talking about, maybe they're a colleague or an acquaintance or someone but, and he's speaking for himself, he said, but for me, from my perspective, calling someone a friend is like, there's a level of reverence and respect there that this person clearly is not living up to for you. And his kind of point there was about friendship, but also just that words in general are powerful and have meaning, and that being intentional with who I'm calling a friend or not it means a lot. And I think it's especially, it just kind of like blew my mind a little bit, because coming from, I think especially like the tech world or the internet world, I call everyone my, friend is just the natural term to use. Like this person I've met.
And you want to have a lot of friends.
And you want to have a lot of friends.
Right. Yeah. Everybody wants to be the person who has a lot of friends.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, that has made me very, a lot more careful about, I think, who I call a friend, who I consider a friend, what I want out of my friendships and what I will require, from like a reciprocal standpoint. And yeah, it was it was one of these things where it was like the water I was swimming in. I wasn't even aware of how lightly I was throwing this term around and kind of giving anyone access to me and my energy. And so it was a powerful, that was a really powerful shift in how I consider friendship.
I love that, man. I had a very interesting realization recently, actually, with this stuff, because I've, like you, had a journey of having a group of people that I hung out with and being bonded by things that, were just not a part of my life anymore. And that there comes with all that, as you kind of move away, there's this weird experience where you're like, I know that this doesn't resonate with me anymore, but I want to have the validation of relationships and being included, and it can be a really tough dance. And there are parts of that experience that felt very lonely. And I was talking to my teacher, and she's like, yeah, it's really interesting. Like, I actually don't want a lot of people around. Like, I don't want people coming into my space. And I was reading this book about these kind of Taoist masters and how many of them lived in isolation. And it occurred to me, like, my view of reality is that essentially it organizes itself so that you can kind of see the next bit of healing, so that you can see what's obstructing your consciousness evolution and liberation. And so it just kind of like gives you these experiences to see the stuff. And I was thinking about it and I was like, wow, you know, the only way to become liberated from loneliness is to experience it. And so it's actually a huge gift to really embrace those experiences, because they're helping you see what obstructs you from resting in them joyfully.
Yeah, man.
And I was like, holy shit, like, wow, like loneliness is happening for me and it's showing me so that I can live more unconditionally. And the funny thing about it is, and this seems to always happen, as that gets recognized and heals, then all of a sudden you start to have aligned people come into your life.
Yeah.
And it's just like, wow.
Yeah.
Like, that's, you know, it's just crazy how that dynamic plays out in so many things, and you don't see it, and you don't see it, and you don't see it, and you don't see it until you see it.
Yeah. I love that. And it's definitely been true for me. How I relate to that, I would agree. I definitely for a long time was accumulating friendship. It was like another form of accumulation. You know, you get money, you get status, you get friends, which are people who will say they like you or will answer your phone call or whatever. And I have done a lot of work around this concept of samskaras, which is, you know, a Sanskrit word, I believe, around that basically means a false identification, false belief that I hold about myself. And for me, there are a few like core ones that I have that are kind of at the root, a root samskara. It's like at the root of a behavior pattern or a habit pattern of the mind. And one of them is I am alone. And that I am afraid to be alone, and that was driving a lot of the behavior, I think, around my desire to have friends, my reluctance to like say no to people, to cut people out of my life, because there was like a fear of, if I don't have this person in my life, then I am further reinforcing, I'm bringing true this fear of this belief that I am alone and that I will forever be alone. And like you said, the only way I know of to overcome it is to get familiar and comfortable with it, and to sit in it, to sit with it, and really investigate what's so bad about it, and is it even possible for you, whatever I am, is it even possible for me to truly be alone? I think that's where being open to kind of some of the mystery of consciousness and existence is really beautiful, because when I ask that question, I'm often surprised by the answer.
That's beautiful. I know you've studied a few things, Vedanta, Kashmir Shaivism. Which part of your study has kind of helped you most with that?
Yeah, I've kind of studied a few different Eastern lineages. I would say they all fall under non-duality broadly, basically that there's no difference between spirit and matter, that, you know, I am God and God is me, and to some extent we are one, or we are all nothing. And that specifically around samskaras was really helpful in some of the Buddhism and Vedanta studies, which are basically helping the practitioner see through the illusion, the Maya, of of sensory experience and the kind of the unrealness of it. Yeah.
Did you ever have a byproduct of that feel like this is meaningless?
Like, as in, if, can you say, I think so, but say more. I want to hear.
So what I notice with a lot of non-dual teachings, and like, it's interesting how you define non-dual, how you defined it, but I notice, I think about a lot of non-dual teachings, how they just kind of teach you to basically just kind of like go above like whatever's happening in your awareness, in your mind. And I've seen a lot of people who go through that and they progress to high levels and they just don't seem to have a lot of joy in life. They just seem to be kind of like, I see these people on YouTube who are just like, I'm non-dual awakened, like just like staring into the screen, and I'm like, all right, well, I don't want whatever you just had. So it's interesting to me because it's a little bit different than than traditions that really focus on the heart.
Yeah.
And I've seen people feel like get basically apathetic versus inspired towards life, because it's all an illusion, it's all nothing, it's all whatever. And I just was curious if you ever had any of that.
I think there can be a temptation towards nihilism with some of that stuff. I've certainly felt it, of like, questioned it, I suppose, of like, okay, what does it matter? Like, what matters then if this is all an illusion? But how I combat that, or where I've kind of landed now, is that there is a lot of the thoughts, feelings, desires, etc. that I have are delusional in a very real way. And part of the work of cleaning up and waking up is polishing the mirror, if it's a very popular metaphor. And what is at the base level of that is love, is pure joy. Like, there is like open-heartedness. I mean, it's beyond words. That's why words kind of fall short, like, of looking at any of these traditions. It's, beyond time, beyond death, beyond space, all of these things that are literally indescribable, but that there is like emanating boundless love at the core of it. And I would say I've had peaks at it in certain, on meditation retreats or in other enhanced states where it's not that nothing matters. It's like everything matters in a really profound way.
That's beautiful. Well, one thing, speaking of shifts in relationships and things that I feel like might be helpful to people listening is, I know you've evolved your relationship with social media. Which is, something that a lot of people, average person, like, a lot of their life is consumed by it and the validation that they get from it. And so, what's your journey been like there?
Oh, wow. Yeah. I mean, it's definitely a journey is a good way to describe it. I would say, like, a decade ago, I was very interested in playing the game of Twitter influence and clout, and accumulating followers and kind of making a name for myself there. And with Twitter specifically, that one's been interesting because I've met some amazing friends and amazing people, but it can also be just an insane, like, drain of my attention, my focus, and like an outrage machine, basically. that's how I think of it. So I took a year off, actually. I was off Twitter for about a year, and it was a very peaceful it was a very peaceful year. And I've rejoined, and I've tried to have better boundaries about, how I use it and when I use it, being more, being more kind of like intentional with it. And then Instagram is another interesting one because it's not really an outrage machine, but it's more of like a FOMO machine that it generates, at least for me. And it's like there's something very contrived and fake around just like the image that people are putting out there. And I think with all of this, it's with all of it getting too involved, I would say, in social media makes the path to awakening a lot harder, because instead of transcending just one ego, you now have to transcend two, basically your literal physical, persona, your meat suit, IRL, but then also this image that you've constructed for yourself online, which is totally different and disconnected from your physical reality, but is also something that many people, including me, very much identify with.
Very interesting. Very interesting. Yeah, well, you could get lucky by like me and just have your account hacked. And you don't have to worry about it.
Be nice.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, that's so funny, man. Two other things I wanted to ask you about that you alluded to pre-show: DMX in Bali. I haven't heard this one yet, so I'm very curious.
Yeah, so I took a sabbatical at the end of 2022, and I would say I was just generally very disconnected in general, emotionally disconnected, physically disconnected. I'd been working very hard, built a company, sold it, worked for the company that bought us, was very burnt out. And when I think about my sabbatical, I would say the first half was about getting connected to what I'll call my internal feminine nature, and the second half was channeling my internal masculine nature. And the internal feminine I think of as intuition, embodiment, emotion. I did a yoga teacher training. I did, breathwork training. I was doing some of these, more softer, restorative, feminine activities that was really connected me with a part of me that I was very disconnected with. So I'd been doing that. I was living in Bali, and I'd been doing this, I was in the middle of a yoga teacher training, and I, one day, like halfway in, I had snapped, because I was living in Bali, which is this incredibly feminine town, eat, pray, love, literally in Ubud takes place there, so surrounded by women. The town of Ubud is very feminine and chaotic. There are no traffic laws. The street names and intersections are completely, have no logic to them. I was in a yoga teacher training. Yoga itself is relatively feminine. All the teachers were women. 8 out of the 10 students were women. And so I had been like really in this kind of feminine soup for a while, and I was like, if I have to feel my effing feelings one more time, like I'm gonna go crazy. And so I remember I took a day off, and I was like, I just need to go to the gym, turn on DMX, and lift heavy stuff. And that was exactly what I did. And I was just like listening to the like gangster rap in a way, for the first time in a long time, was like picking up medicine balls and throwing them down, screaming, grunting, doing all of that. And it was very much a huge turning point for me in the season that I was in, from being like eat, pray, love to, okay, time to like channel, David Goggins and the Hardo part of me.
I love that. Yeah. Sometimes you gotta like, there's a seasonality, right? And it's not to shun or ignore, but kind of go back and forth between the different things that you need.
Yeah.
That's beautiful, man.
Yeah.
Maybe I should go listen to some DMX after this.
it's pretty.
I'm more of a Limp Bizkit guy.
Classic.
When it comes to that stuff. Yeah. So that's awesome. The other curiosity I found myself prior to this conversation was about the kindness hack.
Oh yeah. Yeah, man. I'll give you your flowers here. I've gotten so many compliments on this when people have seen me do it, and I learned it from you. It's a very simple trick, but one that I think is amazing to make the world a better place, which is I now in the back of my car carry around 2 packs of Kind bars, and I always restock them. And anytime I see a homeless person or someone who looks like they're struggling, wandering out on the street, I'll just very quickly roll down the window, reach into the back of it, and hand it to them and go about my day. And you taught me that, and I thought I was like so taken aback when you did that. I was like, okay, I need to adopt this. And anytime another person is in the car with me, they're always like overwhelmed and like, oh my God, that's so kind. No pun intended. And I give you the props for that.
Nice, man. Yeah, it is an amazing practice.
I will say I did have a very Larry David Curb Your Enthusiasm moment with that one time where a homeless person, I like pulled it out, and the homeless person, I handed it to them, and they were basically started yelling at me because they were allergic to peanut butter and that there was peanut butter in this thing, and they couldn't handle it, and I got an earful from them. So some good deeds go punished, but for the most part, it's been a very successful.
Can't make everybody happy.
It's true.
I was catching up with a buddy of mine who's been on the podcast, Mark Krasner. I don't know if you've met him. Amazing human, in Mexico City. And are you familiar with tithing?
Yes.
And so, in certain traditions, it's like tithe a certain % of your income.
Yeah.
And I did that for many years where I would just had 10% of my income just siphoned off to charity water or something else. Yeah. And actually, I think I still do that. But what he did, what I thought was really cool, was like, he didn't really feel very connected to his tithing.
Yeah.
And so he took a portion of his income and he just like knew in his head that like this month, like I have this much money to spend on doing a good deed, on making someone's life better. And so he would do things like just give someone like a couple $100 tip, or like go out, see someone on the street and buy them like a freaking awesome meal.
Yeah.
And just having that much more visceral connection to the tithing practice. And I thought that was a really, really cool idea too.
Yeah. There's something really powerful, even in the kindness hack that you gave me of giving the bars away, of just seeing the gift received and seeing the way it lights someone up. That is just, it nourishes the soul in a way that, we're giving a GoFundMe or, to charity water, which are great, fine charities, but there's just something very visceral felt about seeing the impact.
That's right. He also was telling me about how, I forget in what text, it might have been some type of like Jewish mysticism history, but how basically like God told told the Hebrews like you can test me on anything, but I guarantee you test me on the one of tithing, of how much you give is how much you receive. And now that is actually a law of the universe.
Wow.
And so obviously I don't know that should be the reason why you give.
Yeah.
But it's a very fascinating. Yeah, it's a fascinating thing to think about of just this big energetic exchange ecosystem, and we're giving and receiving, and we're giving and receiving, and to this extent we can expand one, we can expand the other.
Yeah.
And they work in harmony. So something I'm interested in learning more about. People's perspective on that.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Cool, man. Well, I know you have a lot of amazing things you're conjuring up and putting out in the world. And so if people want to kind of learn more about what Alex is up to, what would you say? I
would say follow me on Twitter and Instagram, Integrated Alex, one word. And I will be posting
on both accounts. You have Integrated Alex?
Integrated Alex on both accounts.
Nice.
Yeah. So Integrated Alex on Twitter and on Instagram, and that is where I share my life updates, my offerings. There are a couple of business ideas that I'm cooking on. I do some business coaching and men's coaching as well. So connect with me there and can definitely learn more, and we can stay in touch.
Amazing. Well, thanks, man. This has been awesome.
Beautiful,
so
brother.
much fun.
Yeah.
Have to do it again sometime.
Absolutely. Thank you.